Phil Twyford.
I move that all the words after committee be deleted. Mr Speaker, I want to acknowledge the work of the Honourable Maurice Williamson in bringing this bill to the House. Labor will be supporting this bill to the Select Committee. We see this bill as a modest and positive contribution to the ongoing process of reform of regulation in the building sector, sir. And I want to also acknowledge the work of the Honourable and modest Shane Jones, who started much of this work when he was the Building and Construction Minister. He set up a number of task forces and began a whole process of consultation and discussion with the industry that has led to many of the reform proposals that are contained in this bill. And Shane Jones, in his earlier contribution on the weather tightness bill, was quite right to point out that if he were to join colleagues on the government side of this House, sir, the average quality of contribution on that side would rise and the average quality of contribution on this side would diminish. Well, I have to say that actually it was a great relief, sir. It was a great relief to hear finally a 10-minute contribution from the Minister who opened this debate. That makes a refreshing change from the rather desultory contributions that we've heard from government members this evening, sir. So we support this bill. We think it is a modest step forward in the ongoing process of reform in the building and construction industry. It does, however, sir, lack ambition. And I want to go on and say exactly why we support it and what's good about it and raise some questions about the bill, sir. But let's look at the context of what's happening in the building and construction industry. It's a hugely important part of our economy. It accounts for about 5% of our GDP. Something like 70,000 New Zealanders are employed in the sector. And yet this is an industry that is in crisis. The building consent figures that came out last week show that construction activity in the residential sector has fallen through the floor. We have appallingly low levels of productivity in the building and construction industry. We are killing people on building sites at 2 to 3 times the rate that is happening in Australia, sir. This is an industry that is in desperate need of assistance, and although the measures contained in this bill are positive in general and worthwhile, they are woefully lacking in ambition, sir. And the question that I have for government members is, why don't we see some kind of plan to rescue the building and construction industry, to address the deep-seated productivity problems in the industry and the entrenched health and safety problems in this industry? Currently, in the economic crisis that is besetting the building and construction industry, we are seeing the departure of large numbers of skilled tradespeople at the moment who are going off to Australia. We are seeing apprentices being laid off at the moment because this government does not have a plan, not only for the wider economy, but in particular for this vital industry that we're talking about tonight. The historical context is that in 1991, the national government of the time deregulated the regulation of the building sector, and the response, as we know, was a disaster for New Zealand, a disaster for homeowners that we are still feeling the effects of. And when Labor came in, the fifth Labor government set out to address the problem, and we saw in the 2004 Building Act a genuine attempt to restore a decent building regulation regime. We recognise, sir, that legislation is now, we can see in hindsight, it is too prescriptive, too heavily focused on compliance, and the result was the industry generally stopped building leaky homes, but the heavy compliance regime slowed down the whole industry and added costs, ultimately passed on to homeowners. So it's appropriate at this time, sir, that the reform process will swing the pendulum back towards the centre and give us a more thoughtful, a more light-handed approach that will be better for industry and better for the consumer. So, sir, we're supporting this bill in general, and we look forward to good debate at Select Committee. But we do want to raise some questions at this point. One of them is really to ask why the government has opted for the much more light-handed approach of requiring home warranties be made available to homeowners, that the builder is required to have a home warranty scheme in their back pocket to offer it to homeowners at the point of purchase, and that a much more comprehensive approach, which would have been to make home warranties mandatory and to back it up with a fidelity fund, which I think is the option that most people in the industry recognise would actually solve the problem. It is heavy-handed, and there would be some risk involved in such a big intervention. But I think that's an interesting debate. I would like to hear why the government has gone for a much more insubstantial and light-handed approach that arguably will have less of a chance of solving the problem, sir, and providing real consumer protection. Because I'm not convinced that this will provide the kind of level of protection that's needed, and arguably mandatory home warranties backed up by a fidelity fund that could invest in productivity, that could invest in certification, invest in health and safety, that potentially offered a much more thoroughgoing solution to the deep-seated problems of lack of productivity, poor consumer protection that we see in the industry today. So I think, sir, there are other issues. Reflected in the bill is an attempt to better balance the spread of accountability and responsibility across the different players in the industry, and that's a worthy attempt, sir, to reform the problem in the industry, which is accountability has not been aligned with levels of responsibility, and that's what we need if we want to drive behaviour change in the industry. Accountability has to be aligned with responsibility. There is, and I want to give you an example of this, sir. In the bill, section 14D places on designers and architects the responsibility, sir, for ensuring that the plans and specifications that they deliver to the client, if followed correctly, will result in building work that is compliant with the building code. And at the same time, section 24 lets councils off the responsibility of carrying out inspections and issuing a code of compliance. This is a major change, sir, to the regulatory regime that has not been discussed publicly by the government. It puts a huge amount of responsibility and liability onto designers and architects, and I wonder whether that is in fact a sensible apportionment of accountability, and whether the unforeseen consequences of that might actually undermine the objectives of this bill. So we talked about home warranties. The other major pieces of the reform process that have been discussed are risk-based consenting, which the Minister outlined in her opening speech. We support that. The intent is good, and it's going to mean that we see a much lighter and differentiated approach to consenting. That will mean, for instance, that certain things will be able to be done that won't even require a building certificate, sir, anymore. But things like carports, porches, verandas, simple houses, freestanding barns. And I know the leader of the Labour Party, the Honourable Phil Goff, will be extremely relieved. He was most upset at being whacked with a huge building consent charge by his local council when he built a barn on his property. So that's one New Zealander who will be happy to see that change, sir. The bill also makes some further improvements to the licensed builder practitioner scheme. which is worthwhile. It brings in prescribes a code of consent